Everyone, we're here today with Kendra Kolomyja, and I want to say that you're probably the OG of top female axe thrower. And can you tell us, how long have you been throwing for?
I think the first time I ever went throwing was actually in like 2016. So that was just for a friend's party. It was just one of those for fun things. Um, I wasn't great, but at some point somehow Big X clicked for me and I managed to win, our party tournament. So that made it a lot more fun. And it was so much fun though that we had small kids at the time. I think our daughter was like 2,
Oh, wow.
and we realized it was okay. This is something we could do because the coach we had was really pumping leagues and things. So we signed up for the next league in the car on the way home from the party. And we figured, okay, this is a date night. We can get out. We can do something. It's not just going to the movies. And yeah, so we actually started leagues in 2017, I think January. So it's been a while.
And so you basically have started throwing axes at the time that WATL was basically kind of born,
Mhm.
integrated. So, because our sport isn't very old, and basically, it was founded. What WATL itself was founded in 2017. You are, yeah, and that's what my hunch was, is that I think you are one of the OGs of axe throwing. And you've been a superstar. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to kind of dive into axe throwing techniques, tips, and get right into it. So let's start off first off with hatchet. So tell us about your hatchet throw. How do you throw it? How do you hold it? Is there any quirks? Anything that you do before? Do you spin it? Tell us a bit more about kind of any sort of kind of quirks that you may have when you're throwing.
It's really funny actually because my throws changed a lot, especially in the last year and a half or so. One thing I've always done is, yeah, when you mentioned the spinning it, that is definitely something I do. When I'm retrieving, I'm always doing the twirly thing in my hand, and then that just kind of gets it set right where I need it to be. If it's feeling a little off, I'll back out and I'll actually do the twirl it in my hand again. Okay, there it is. When it comes to my grip and setup, I'm the least technical thrower alive. I could, if it was up to me and me alone, I could not tell you what I do. I wouldn't know where my feet go or anything else. I'm thankful that I have somebody else who I practice with quite a bit. And Nick is a much more technical thrower than I am. And he breaks it all down. So I remember when he first started trying to coach me and help me along, it was like, well, where are your feet? I'm like, there-ish. And it's like, well, and at the time I was a step thrower for a really long time. And it was, well, where do you step to? I'm like, I don't know, wherever my foot lands. And he drilled into me that, no, you actually need to know these things. You need to be consistent with them to make it work. So being a step thrower for a really long time, it was a huge change for me to switch to no step throwing, which is kind of the direction a lot of people have gone. I was decent at step throwing though. I mean, that's what I did for a really long time. Switching to the no step, it was just eliminate one of the mechanics. And so that's one of the things that, and again, this is, my own personal in-house coach has his system that he's broken it down to ABC. Your A is your feet. So exactly where your feet need to line up. I've been able to play with that and adjust that. And now I know precisely where my feet need to be, where for years, if it felt good, do it. That's fine. B, yeah, is your line up with your grip. And I do have my axe handy. So I mean, for me, it's definitely line up. I'm pretty much resting all of the weight of it on my fourth finger. And that's what I come back to all the time. My fourth finger weight, it's sort of braced right in that little nook in my first finger there, but my fourth finger is really my trigger point for everything in my throw. For me, lining it up, that's still the part that I'm still working on. And where do I align things? Because I have it almost right in front of my face. So it's a little bit hard to judge where I'm lining it up because the target, I'm almost looking right down through the axe. So I can't quite place it. Although I've noticed that if I'm not high enough, if I'm not lining up high, it's going to go low. So I've started working on actually trying to figure out where my lineup starts. Bringing it straight back, keeping the elbow in, and follow straight through, throw your hand right at the spot. So for me, for the longest time, it was all about just what feels good. Oh, that throw went well. That throw felt good. Do that again. Just look for the feeling of having it feel good when you released it. And that carried me for quite a while. But when you start trying to really break down the minutia, and you're talking about millimeters at this point, the game has gotten so good. I mean, yeah, for a long time you could get by on, you're within this, that's close enough. And now it's, mils. And if you're not able to figure out why you were a millimeter off, then you need to break that down more.
Awesome. And can you tell me a bit more about your axe? There's a few things that I noticed when you pulled it. It looks like it's got a bit of a curve at the end. Can you talk about the handle length? Tell us what you like about the slight curve to it, what you don't like. Tell us a bit more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've actually only just started throwing this a few months ago. I was on a plum for a really long time. And I heard a few people suggest, because I was getting a little bit of wobble side to side, that with going to the standstill throw again, I didn't have that momentum from the step. And I used to find the momentum from the step would keep things straight. And so now, having to just control it with just my wrist and my release, I went to a king for my head, because it has that nice flare back. It keeps all the weight right through the center. And so it kind of helps with this whole bit of redirect back and forth. My handle, this is actually like an old school Shop Pro style handle, which is what I have done for a really long time, is throw those. Luckily, Goose over at 81 Axes, he's a close friend. And so we get to go out and workshop exactly how we want our handles to be. And so we'll come and we'll play around with things, get the weight exactly the way we want. I mean, it's basically a Shop Pro handle, which is what I have always thrown. I've played around with things like recurve, but I tend to under rotate. So recurve for me was not the greatest thing. I can throw a straight handle. And when I first started throwing a king, it was on a straight handle. But then we figured, okay, try and get it as precise to me as possible. So going to the Shop Pro, it's cut down a little bit. I think it's just under 15. I think it's like 14 3/4. But doing little tweaks, like flattening out the front part in here. So where where that fourth finger sits, it's all nice and flat. Everything's just square, just a little bit to me. It's a little bit narrow because my hand's a little bit smaller. So just all these teeny tiny little tweaks to it. And luckily enough, yeah, we get to workshop that for a while and just keep playing until it's exactly where I need it.
And that's a really good point. I keep forgetting, the differences of the size of people's hands, and that actually does matter, especially when you're gripping it. So I'm glad that Goose was able to make those adjustments for you. Now, let me ask you about. So we've talked about Hatchet. I think the next natural progression would be to talk about duels, and how you throw duels with Nick, because anyone that has seen any sort of clips of you guys throwing know how dangerous and deadly and how good you guys are. So can you talk to us a bit more about your guys' technique, like what your approaches are with duels, how maybe the smaller target may or may not have changed your approach and how you go for the targets. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, well, with duels, I mean, one of the biggest changes was that, when we first started throwing duels at WATL, that would have been Throwdown in Colorado was the first time that we'd actually done any kind of a WATL tournament. And we did really well in duels in that one. I think that's my only WATL title win of any tournament, was that duels tournament. And at the time, I was still step throwing and Nick was standing still, and everybody had a heart attack. So when the rule changed that you had to be same, you can't do one and the other, I'm still convinced that's pointed right at us, but one of us had to change. And so we tried it both ways. We tried both of us stepping. We tried with me standing still, which was a huge adjustment. In the end, because I was thinking of moving to the standstill anyway, we adjusted to both of us being static as close together as we can. With the smaller targets, I tend to not aim directly at the bull. I'm kind of just a hair off to the right. I'm sort of aiming almost just to the outside of it. And I mean, I'll clip it a fair number of times, or I'll wander in that 5. And I mean, if you're throwing a 55 in duels, if you hit 6-5, 5 throws, you're pretty solid. There's not too many people that you're going to have too much trouble with. I mean, they're out there for sure. But if you can get a solid 11 on every throw, you don't necessarily need to get greedy. That was the fun thing, actually. Even when we went to throw down at the time, it was the full 3.5-inch bull, and nobody was trying to throw 2 axes in that. And I remember we actually did try and put both axes in that bowl, because I mean, it's 3.5. It's not that bad. It's fine. I do remember Kump and Will giving us dirty looks, going, seriously, stop it. But it's, I mean, for us, the whole duels idea for us, sometimes we don't practice as much as we should, but we're so used to just practicing side by side in lanes that our timing has gotten fairly close just from practicing for years and years side by side. So when we actually move into the same lane, it's not such a big adjustment. I find for me the biggest thing actually in throwing duels is that I benefit in my mental game, because I have somebody else to focus on. I have somebody else to work off of. I'm less in my own head, and I'm more focused on their movements and their pattern and their timing. So it takes me out of what I'm worried about with my own throw, where my brain will get scattered and things, and I'm able to dial it in a lot more when I'm throwing with Nick. And I mean, he's rock solid, and he's very comfortable in throwing in high pressure situations. So I lean on that a lot. But I also find that, yeah, I'm focusing less on what's going on in my head and more just on what's going on in this moment, concentrating on his throw and following through with it. So I find that actually is super helpful. I throw better in duels than I do in Hatchet on my own, which is frustrating, but
Very interesting. And you think that's the mental element of it, is that correct?
absolutely, yeah.
And that's actually a really good segue, because I do want to talk about it, because I think that is something that we've kind of always talked to throwers about, is, how do they overcome those high pressure mental scenarios? And a lot of people don't realize that axe throwing, you're throwing against yourself. It's like golf. Like, you're going after the lowest possible score. In this case, you're going for the highest possible score. And it's really all in yourself. You're not really, in a way, going against the other person, but they're beside you, and you kind of are. And it creates this kind of scenario where, you put pressure on yourself. And so, can you tell us about more of kind of the mental exercises that maybe you go through to help kind of clear your head out a bit more? Because I think that's important, especially for people who are looking to compete, that have maybe never competed before, and maybe their heart's racing a bit too much, or they're in their own head, and how they get themselves to kind of bring themselves down to get their head back in the game. Can you tell us a bit more about how you kind of have about you and your coping mechanisms?
I mean, there's definitely a lot of breathing and concentrating on your breathing involved. When it comes to your game and getting ready to go in, I lie to myself a lot, and that I just believe I will hit every single throw. It's one of those things where you're not going to, you're going to miss things, but having that confidence going into every single throw, going, nope, I'm hitting this every time. It's really cool when you get one of those days when you just happen to have everything just flowing just right, and you get that wonderful zen, and you're like, no, I'm hitting every throw, and it works, and it happens. Those are really fun days. Other days when you're like, no, I'm going to hit this, and then it's all over. You're like, well, but I'm going to hit the next one. And it's, that definition of insanity where you keep doing the same thing and keep telling yourself, no, it's great, it'll be fine every time. When you're getting up and you can feel, and you're lining up and you can feel that shake happening in your hand, I hate that. But it's also accepting and realizing that that's what it is. It's like, okay, it's just nerves. It's fine. You've done this before. This is no different than every other throw. Just breathe right on through it. And really, yeah, take that deep breath and try and settle yourself a little bit. Try and wait for that moment when you're feeling like, okay, the shake has come down a little bit. Maybe it's not going to go all the way away, but just sort of push through. But a lot of it is, yeah, just accepting and realizing that, no, of course you're going to be nervous. Anybody who says they're never nervous, I mean, then you don't care. You're never nervous, you don't care. So you're nervous because you care about what's happening and the outcome that's going to happen. I've definitely had moments where I remember thinking while I was lined up that I actually can't feel my legs right now, because I was just stressed and I was just jello legs. It was like, okay, well, just do the thing. This is no different than every other throw. Just do the throw you know how to do. You're going to hit it. It's fine.
And it's interesting you bring up the when someone says they don't care, or sorry, when they don't feel nervous, it's probably because they don't care. And I would say that is actually like 100% true. That's ever only really happened to me once. And I'll tell you a quick story. This is at the Canadian Open. And this was whoever won the match. I think there's like 2 matches leading up to TV. I didn't want to be on TV. I had to run the production. So I did not care. And because I did not care at all, I ended up winning. And then I make it on TV. And then it's like, okay, now I'm on TV. Now I care. Because now it's like, I made it this far. I got to make this work. And then I had a drop. And then I just started making, and Kump actually ended up taking me out. But it's funny you mentioned that. And it brought me to that memory of, you're right. If someone says they don't get nerves, it's because they don't care. And I think that's a very valid assessment. Now, big axe. Are you throwing big axe?
Oh, yeah.
Amazing. Let me hear more about tips on big axe, how you line up, how you hold the big axe. And if you have one handy, I would love to see it as well, just so people can see how you grip it.
All right. I am now throwing a Colossus because can't argue with that kind of coverage. This is it's another 81 handle that's sort of been shaped for me. It's almost straight, but not quite. There is that little bit of a swell. There's a hair of just a curve to it. It's a modified egg door style. So it's kind of an egg door that's had the bottom end clipped off for the handle style, but shortened up a bit so I can get a little bit closer now for WATL. I mean, I'm definitely a two-handed thrower for big axe. All these people throwing one-handed, I would wreck my shoulder. I've done it. I can do it. I couldn't do it for very long. I could get maybe 5 or 6 decent throws and then it would be gone. Honestly, my big axe grip is so much like my hatchet grip. It's exactly the same as far as where my hand sits. It's all about that 4th finger again, all the weights resting on my 4th finger. My left hand, it's pretty much just there for balance, just to kind of keep it centered and things. I try actually to think very much to keep everything on my right hand, and my left hand is just there. As soon as my left hand gets more involved, everything's shooting off to the right because my left hand will push it. So I make a point when I'm lining up to just think about my right hand. So I'm almost telling myself, you're throwing this with just your right hand. Your left hand's just kind of along for the ride. Don't let it actually play into it at all. For big axe, I've actually also switched to a no step for that, though. That's new. That's only been, I think, back in January, I think I switched to a no step about a week before Cascadia. It was kind of a surprise to do a change to my throw and have it go well quickly. Changing to the no step and hatchet. I mean, I'm a year and a half into that and it's still struggle bus. So, but no step with the big axe again, because you can be a little bit closer, getting a shorter handle, getting something bigger with more coverage. When it comes to the actual big axe throw, I mean, again, like I said, I'm not a very technical thrower. It's how does this feel? What feels good? I've tried to, think of some of the technical things. And sometimes when I'm practicing, I'll do a little bit of the technical stuff where, okay, where's my weight and where's my release point? Where's my lineup point and things like that. It immediately goes out the window as soon as I actually start playing a game in BGX. I have not got the reps in. I mean, the number of throws, just the count of how many hatchet throws versus how many big axe throws I've done, it's very different. So it's still a work in progress, and I'm actually feeling really good about my big axe game. Finally, I never have before. It's always been voodoo science to me, and for the longest time, everybody knew that they could just slap me around in big axe, and they would try for that. It's finally starting to click though, and I'm not sure exactly what the shift is, if it's just that little bit of a change with trying new techniques, actually thinking about techniques instead of just, blindly throwing it. I did have an aha moment when I was stepping with big axe, where somebody took a picture of me right as I released, and I realized that with my step, I hadn't actually stepped yet. I was still mid-air when I was throwing. And it made, one of those light bulb moments where you realize, I'm like, oh, well, no wonder I have no consistency. I'm literally on one foot in motion mid-air trying to throw this. Yeah, that's never going to work. But it wasn't until I saw that one picture where it actually clicked, that it was like, oh, well, that's a problem. So trying to shift to the no step now for big axe, it's helped immensely. But again, work in progress, as is everything.
No, that makes sense, and I think a lot of players are moving towards the no step move, and you're right. I mean, I don't know how these guys do it with the one-handed throw. Like, they're throwing it like a hatchet, and I mean, like, generally speaking, like, you got to have a lot of stamina, and you got to have strong wrists, and I mean, it's the holding of the big axe. Like, you're holding so much weight. I mean, that's
the biggest thing, is that I literally couldn't do it. I have small wrists compared to a lot of the guys out there, and just I mean, a lot of women in general, we don't have that arm strength. So you need to adapt and figure out what the difference is and how you can make that work. So I mean, yeah, when it's me lining up for big axe, okay, I need both hands there just to hold that little bit. And if I was trying to do it with one, yeah, that weight's so far from your hand that it's just going to be a disaster.
Yeah, I'm the same way, and I could probably get away with maybe 2-3 matches, but a tournament, it's like, it's done. Like, there's no consistency, because
not a chance.
You're completely tired out. And I mean, that's where you have, I think bigger guys like John Depke or Tyler Flynn, guys that are 6'4"-ish, 6'5"-ish, 200 and probably 25 plus pounds. Like, they're big boys, and they got big wrists, and they can manage that kind of weight. But the average person, male or female, I think they'll struggle with it. And I mean, I'm 6'4", I'm 200 pounds, and I can't do it. And so, I can only imagine what it's like for literally anyone else to try doing it consistently. And it's admirable, but consistency wise, I think it's very tough from a tournament standpoint. And I like the way you grip it. It reminds me a lot of Mike Kump. I noticed that he uses a lot in his fingertips when he's lining up the big axe. And I do remember seeing some of his matches, and I thought that was very interesting, the way you're holding it as well. And yeah, it's almost like a light. I can see the accuracy as opposed to doing a hammer grip. But then again, you have people like, who I never understood how it worked, but you have like a world champion like Sam Carter.
And he's got the full, I mean, he's not white knuckling, but he's just got that nice full out grip. And I mean, it's funny with the hammer grip, because that's how I throw knives now. And I had not thought to do it, but I was when we started doing knife leagues, which, I mean, just this year we finally started doing knife leagues, and talking with Travis Blank and listening to a bunch of his tips and things like that. He was like, no, the hammer grip's a lot easier for starters, because I was trying pinch grips and I was trying to hold it like a hatchet. And I mean, I could do it to a point, but it was all over the place. But then as soon as I switched to a hammer grip, I had a lot more control, and it just felt a lot more comfortable. Weird, but it felt weird.
Yeah, and I think it does. I personally, I don't like it. And even though you're right, like, your throw is more consistent because there's less variability. There's no flick, there's no motion. And for knives, basically sticking at like a quarter of an inch of a point. Like, it's literally, you don't have much wiggle room to overload.
No, so finicky.
It is. There's so much room for error by doing the slightest little tweak in that flick, that it's not like an axe where you have 4 inches or 4 and 5 inches of a big axe to stick the blade on, and you can get away with the different kind of tilts, whether it's flat, whether it's tipped in, but it's going in because it's got the force. But with knives, good luck. Like
Yeah,
it's very hard, and that's
not
where I think the hammer strength kind of comes in, because the hammer strength forces you not to flick the wrist, and you're not also, the pinching motion, you don't have that sway either.
mhm.
And so anyways, that's very interesting, and what you're saying makes a lot of sense. Now, one of my last questions that I have for you is, what tips would you have for throwers that are starting out, and would any of your tips differ, for any female throwers who are maybe starting out, that are maybe looking to get into the sport? Like what tips and advice do you have to share?
I mean, make sure that you're having fun. Like really enjoy what you're doing. You didn't get into this to stress out over. And I mean, I'm terrible for it. And there have definitely been days where there's tears and frustration and everything else like that. But again, it's because you care. When you're just getting into it and you just want to start throwing, it's perfectly fine to get into it and throw just for fun. You don't necessarily have to be pursuing worlds to get a lot out of the sport and to have that enjoyment and to have a good time with it. For anybody who does want to start pushing to compete a little bit, go to a tournament. Get out of your home league. I mean, if you're comfortable in your home league and you're just having a good time and that's where you want to be with it, great. If you want to progress, don't wait until you feel like you're good enough to go. Just go. Find something close. There's so many now. I mean, you don't need to invest to fly across the country or things like that. Do if you want to. Go to the big ones. They're great. But just go to a tournament where you're throwing with somebody who's not the person you're throwing with every week, and watch and see what they're doing and learn about what's happening. I mean, that was a huge kicker for us, was that when WATL shut everything down and we were all sitting at home, I practiced more than I've ever practiced in my entire life and was throwing more than we've ever thrown, because what else you got to do? So I mean, the level of throwing that I was at the time, it elevated enormously, because weird 3 hours of practice a day for months. And who knew? But when we finally got to go back to tournaments, the game had changed from when we had left. And so getting back into the tournament circuit and seeing what other people are doing, because there's so many innovations and people will come up with a small tweak, and then everybody else will sort of see what's working. They'll take it home, they'll workshop it, they'll adapt it to themselves. But unless you're there, you don't see those changes that are happening, and you don't get, the exposure to that wider range of what people are doing, what's possible, what handles people are using, what heads are popular now, and why, how they're throwing, and things like that. All of that stuff you can only get when you travel to tournaments. So if you really want to get serious about actually competing and you really want to get more involved in the circuit, just go. Don't wait until, oh, well, when I'm good enough. I mean, it breaks my heart when I see people, they're like, yeah, I really like to throw. I've had fun at parties, but I'm not good enough for league. It's like, that's why you join leagues, so you get good. And same thing with tournaments. So it's like, well, I'm not going to win anything, so why go? It's like, well, you'll never be good enough to win anything if you haven't been going. And just getting into that different environment and being in a different room and a different place, and the lanes are different and the lines are different, the lights, the air. I mean, we've had some where there's air conditioning blowing right in your face. Okay, that's something you need to learn, and how to adapt and how to work around it. And I mean, there's nothing like throwing for pressure situations, like throwing in a tournament in a new place against somebody you've never thrown with before. And especially if you happen to run into one of, the names, then that's a whole thing. But that's part of it too, though, is that going to these tournaments and meeting, all the names, and realizing they're just people. They're there to have a good time too. But it depends on what your goals are. Biggest tip though, yeah, just do it. If you want to get better, go learn new things, take it home, embrace the suck that when you change stuff, it's not going to click right away. I mean, you might get lucky and get that honeymoon phase for a week or two where everything's working great, like a brand new axe. It's amazing how good people are with new axes. And I think this is Tyler's, half of his secret is he changes axes every tournament, that you get that new axe and it's like it refocuses you. You actually have to pay attention to things. You don't have that complacency. So that honeymoon phase with a brand new axe can be amazing. And then it's going to go down. And then you got to work to get it all the way back up. So yeah, learn new things, try different stuff, realize that it's going to take work. I mean, nobody who's at the top end has got there by accident. They're all putting in an insane amount of work. And the skill level has just kept climbing. I mean, there was a point where I was, I had the highest score at one point in some things, and I didn't get better because I wasn't running the practice. I wasn't doing the things. I wasn't going to the tournaments. It wasn't that I was getting worse necessarily, but everybody else kept climbing. So realize it's going to take work. But have fun with it. I mean, don't do it because, okay, now I have to go and do the grind and do the thing. Do it because you're enjoying it. It's work, but it's work that you like to do. So why not?
Yeah, and I think that's great advice. And to your point, like I myself, like most people don't realize, a lot of what I know today about axes, axe manufacturing, axe head design, I got that stuff from tournaments. And just being at tournaments and talking to people and seeing like how they sharpen things, why they do things a certain way. The whole idea of having a straight handle on an axe, that didn't exist like 5 years ago. No one was doing it. Like you couldn't, like, why would you ever put a straight handle on an axe? It's meant to stay in your hand. So no one was doing it. And so, getting out to these tournaments and seeing like the things that throwers are doing, I'm even thinking about Ryan Smith on how he said, his first tournament was a US Open. I think it was 2019 maybe. And he got his butt kicked. And he said, I think he might have gone 1-2 or 0-2. I can't remember what it was. And he was just asking people for advice. He was absorbing it. And then, here we have the next world champion. It was just unbelievable how quickly, he was able to turn things around. But, to your point, it didn't come overnight. He was putting in the work, just like you were, during the COVID shutdowns when WATL was happening. The whole, I think that was probably the biggest fundamental shift in the level of gameplay that has ever happened at any given point in time. No one, I don't think, has, as a whole, the whole community just basically, everyone just leveled up. And it's kind of like any one of these, 60 to 100 some odd players last year, any one of them could easily have won the world championship. They just got that good that fast by putting in that much work. So I think this is all very great advice. Kendra, last question for you quickly. Tell us about the venue you're opening up.
Yay. I mean, yeah, right now I'm still in the garage. We have the Garage Mahal leagues that hopefully this is the last season we're here in the garage. I mean, we love it. It's wonderful, but we only have 2 targets. We've only got so much space. And so, yeah, we've been looking for a really long time. The market has been painful. Finally have a space in Calgary that we're actually going to be opening in fall, early fall is the hope. So yeah, Nick's there right now, actually doing some demo and tearing stuff out and playing around with some things. And hopefully, yes, it should be a big enough space that, our goal is to, have some tournaments back in Canada, because there aren't a lot. I know Ben's running one in August, but that's Ontario. That's far. So just trying to build some more out west here. We have a really, really strong supportive community out here, but it's, we're very dispersed. And so it's been a thing that we've wanted to do, and we even talked about it pre-COVID, was that maybe this was something we would like to do. And now, obviously that was not the greatest plan for a couple of years there, but it's looking like maybe things are rolling in the right direction now. So hopefully in a couple months, Live Edge will actually be open to the public, and we can have people come in. And tournaments. We've talked with so many people, and it's like, yeah, we'd love to come up. I'm like, we would love to have you. just maybe not in this room because it gets a little crowded.
And what I will say is, of the places I've been to in Canada, I think Calgary is probably my favorite place to visit. And so you're right. I think for a tournament, I think it would do extremely well. Just being so close, even being so close to, like, well, basically being beside Banff, being a stone's throw away to Whistler, Vancouver. It's an amazing region. And what people don't realize about Canada is, if I could paint a picture, there's basically, we have Toronto/Montreal, then you have Calgary, and then you have Vancouver, and that's basically it. And there's not really
There's
much.
nothing. It's
No. And
empty.
the equivalent of that for American friends that are going to be watching this, it's like, you have New York, you have Wisconsin in the middle, and then you have Los Angeles, and there's nothing in between. There's no cities, there's no anything. And so that's literally how dispersed we are in Canada. And so I think you paint a very clear picture. As you're right, there is such a passionate and big community in Calgary and in Alberta and in that western part of
the whole West Canada region. I mean, that was one of the great things during WATL, was that whole global throwdown and the Tournament of States thing. And I mean, I got to meet a whole bunch of people from our region that I had never met before because they're so far. I mean, all the way to Vancouver Island and in Vancouver, and we had Saskatchewan people, and we had so we were super far. There was no chance we were getting together in the same room, but it was so wonderful to actually get to meet people from my region who are, a good 15-hour drive away.
No, that's great. Well, Kendra, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you again for the time. Thanks for the tips in the interview.